we had a quote on our staff room door of the history department that was, and I think it's a Churchill quote because that man has very many quotable quotes, but those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes.
Repeat it?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, I think that was a sort of really embedded in me to make sure we're always looking to the past and thinking about the past, but and learning and not being ignorant of it, making sure we're avoiding the mistakes. But probably where this book, my first book, began, and sort of the idea that I really want to explore World War II in multiple stories, probably began with understanding more about my grandfather's experience in World War II. So my grandfather was a Lancaster bomber pilot in World War II. So that, I mean, maybe that means something to you, maybe it means something to your listeners, but what it means to me is that he was a young man. He was 22, 23, and he volunteered he actually was a New Zealander, so he volunteered for the New Zealand Air Force. He learnt to fly. He was on his way to Singapore when Singapore fell, and he got diverted to the UK. And there he learnt to fly. Like Lancasters are like this iconic aircraft of World War II. And they're like this really cumbersome plane on the ground, but very elegant in the sky. And the bombers that the RAF had in the beginning weren't really up for the job that they'd been given, which was to go, attack Germany. So, the Allies had held off the Germans in the Battle of Britain, and the bombers were sort of taking the fight back to Germany. And the planes weren't up to scratch at the beginning, but when the Lancaster came along, it was sort of a bit of a turning point. And my grandfather, like 10,000 other Australians and like 125,000 other men, was part of a crew in one of these planes. They would fly low and slow over enemy territory, under fire the whole time, in sub-zero temperatures, drop their bombs, some of them would hold steady for another 30 seconds while they took a photograph to make sure that their bombs were on target, and then they would nick off at home as fast as they could. Of the 125,000 men who flew in a crew in Bomber Command, almost half of them died, which meant it's a toss of a coin whether or not they come home. And if they did come home, they saw friends fall out of the sky. If they were at home, they saw that the people who went out didn't always come home. Yeah. I find that incredibly moving to think that people went and did that. I'm not sure. That's actually quite a noble sacrifice, really, when you think about it, because those men, the ones who survived, were often, and this is true in my grandfather's case, really, that impacts you for the rest of your life when something like that happens.
Of course, yeah. PTSD and especially when you say that many, 50%. One day you're sitting around having a feed with your mates, and then the next day you come back and potentially half of them are gone. I mean, that can affect any. Yeah, wow.
And also the work that they were doing was not, it was work that they had, they were commanded to do as part of the armed forces. Yeah. So they did it under those circumstances. But in the end, this strategy of strategic bombing, that it was called, during the war, especially, after the war was won, it was really questioned as like, basically you destroyed half of Europe in order to defeat Hitler. We're very glad we've defeated Hitler, but let's not talk about the fact that we actually have destroyed a lot of Europe. Yeah. And certainly my grandfather's case, that was like, that affected him for the rest of his life. He was involved in raids that caused a lot of damage to, documented caused a lot of damage and a lot of casualties, and it never sat right with him for the rest of his life.